We're live, we're ThinkTech Talks. We're talking about community matters because community does matter. Today we're talking about fiscal policy now and tomorrow with guess who? Kalbert Young, the State Budget Director. And our special additional guest and co-host, I suppose, is Kali'i Aquino, who is the host of a Hanukkah Ko, our Monday 2 o'clock show, and he's also the president of Grassroot Institute. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, Kalbert.
Good afternoon, Jay.
Great to have you here.
Great to be here, Jay, and Kalbert, always good to
Very nice
see
to
you.
Yes.
I want some of that, too.
Aloha.
Before we start the heated discussion.
No, we don't do that. We are always friendly, no matter what.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so the news that I want to raise in the first block is, we have 844 $1 million, which some people think that's like, free money. What is it exactly?
Yeah, so to better understand what the $844 million represents, that's the positive ending balance on June 30th, 2013. So the state finished on a cash basis in our financial plan, cash basis, with $844 million on June 30th, 2013, finished that year. So that's just a matter of how many actual revenues collected for the state versus how much actual expenditures was expended by the state, and the ending balance is $844 million.
It's not hypothetical, it's real money. It's in the bank.
Well, on June 30th,
It was in the
2013, there was on the financial plan, I could point to $844 million.
Is it still there?
No, I mean, it's different. It could be more, it could be less. There's no real way of knowing that, but at a point in time, at least for taxpayers, they would know that their state on that day had a positive ending balance, which in and of itself is a significant thing, because there have been years where the state has struggled to get a positive ending balance, and most recently it's been in the heart of the recession, the financial recession, when the state of Hawaii was challenged to finish with a positive ending balance.
Yeah, it's interesting is because it's dynamic and it's all against a backdrop that we have to balance the budget. We must balance the budget. So this isn't necessarily a balance of the budget. It's just positive ending balance. And it isn't necessarily based on the council revenues because that's hypothetical. So where does it fit? I mean, what should it mean to us, all of us, to know that at June 30 we had this money?
Yes, so there is a requirement for the executive and the legislature to appropriate a balanced budget. And the legislature does that every year. And the executive, regardless of administration, has proposed balanced budgets each year. But in the course of the fiscal year, after that budget has been approved, the challenge has been that balanced budget is dependent upon a hypothetical forecast of what revenues will be. So the budget is constructed on an assumption that revenues will materialize a certain, hasn't always materialized. That's been a challenge. But it's also based on a certain level of expenditures that's appropriated. And whether or not those expenditures actually get expended, or if they are expended to the fullest extent relative to how much revenues actually come in, that has been the challenge.
Sure.
A lot of times in the past several years, the Council on Revenues forecast when the budget was constructed doesn't materialize to that level. In fact, the council has had to reduce their forecast. And actual revenues have come in far less than what the revenues were forecasted when the budget was constructed. It's in those years that have been challenged to make sure that the budget is executed with a positive ending balance.
We don't have that problem now, though. And I guess the question I would ask myself is, what does this mean in terms of spending? If I'm a legislator, and I'm not, but if I was,
None of us are. Yeah.
would I feel that burning a hole in my pocket? Would I say, oh, it's time to go back to grants and aid? It's time to spend some money? What would I say?
Well, I'll tell you that there is definitely that sentiment among some legislators. What we're trying to impart upon elected officials, department directors, department staff, and the general public, of course, is that what the $844 million represents, it's not a bank account from which we should just start spending it because we have the money. We should think very prudently about what we can do to better utilize that for and to prepare for the future.
I think, Kalbert, you hit the nail on the head. That helps clarify it when you said it's not a bank account. A lot of times people look at that, which really shows the flow of money, and say that's a surplus. And surplus sometimes is a misleading word. It's like
The
we've got this-
connotations
right?
are,
Extra
yes.
money, or money that we can go now and spend. But what you just pointed out is very important. That it also depends upon the projection of revenues.
That's right.
And when the revenues are projected to be less, that $844 million goes down. But isn't there something else too? Some of that $844 million, isn't that considered a surplus? Because the proposed budget of the governor was actually brought down. There was a proposal that more would be spent. I think this is what Senator David Ige, also a Democrat like the governor, has suggested.
Yes, so if we're talking about the reasons for the 844 or
Sure.
what went into the 844, there's a myriad of multiple contributors. Going into that fiscal year 2013, going into that year, the budget already was constructed by both the legislature and the executive with a presumption that there was going to be a positive ending balance.
Yes.
And at the time, the presumption was that the ending balance was going to be about $330 million. So the legislature, the executive, had already constructed its budget, an appropriate budget, with an assumption that there was going to be a positive ending balance. Now, of course, that would depend upon revenues actually coming in to the levels that were anticipated. The fact that the year ended with more than the anticipated ending balance, $844 million, really is significant, but you have to realize that it really is only about $500+ million more than what was anticipated. And that $500 million, I can break it down for you.
Sure.
Of that $500 million, $165 million is due to expenditures of the executive branch that were less than the legislative appropriation.
So, in other words, it's not that there is a pot of money, as you pointed out earlier. It's that a good part of that figure that we call surplus is actually that we spent less. We had to adjust our budget figure.
That's right. It's a purely cash basis.
That's right.
So for business people, we should think more of it as a cash flow item, and on any given day, a snapshot on any given day, and in this case, it happens to be June 30th, 2013.
Kind of like when my wife goes shopping and she sees this piece of jewelry and it's on sale for 50%, and she tells me that how much I've saved.
You saved, yes, exactly.
Because she didn't buy it at 100%.
Yeah.
Would that be an apt metaphor?
Yes, and you know, when I go around talking to legislators or the general public, I relay it to our own household
Yes.
situations. And that would be tantamount to saying, you know, on December 31st, at the end of the calendar year, if you looked at your savings account, your bank account, and you had, let's say, $844 in your
Sure.
bank account, is that more or less than what you really need to feel healthy financially, knowing that you have January 1st, the very next day,
There you go.
to expend expenditures? And
In fact, I think it's very good that you pointed out that this isn't money sitting in a bank. And you spoke earlier of one measure. When we run businesses, we have two documents we want to look at. We want to look at the profit and loss statement,
Yes.
which shows the flow of income. And that's what we're talking about when we say last June there was $844 million. But there's the other very important document called the balance sheet.
Yep.
And if we don't look at the balance sheet, we may say, look, we've got this cash surplus, so to speak,
right.
but we forget of the fact that we've got these debts. And I know we're going to talk
I'm
about
going
it
to get to
later.
that.
Yes.
I'd like to go back for a minute and talk about the 844. I mean, there's some issue. There was an article in the paper Sunday week ago about exactly, how to get generated. And, I mean, David Ige was saying that it was because the legislature was trying to control costs. And that was one factor. And I believe another factor was that a couple of years ago, there was a temporary tax increase, income tax increase, I think it was, which was like for 2 years. And that must have generated extra tax revenue, yeah.
there was a number of revenue enhancement measures that were
Yeah.
passed since 2010.
Yeah.
Some of them have sunsetted already, but some of them are still in play.
Yeah.
And those have, in some way, helped to increase temporarily
Yeah.
general fund revenues. So keep in mind now, this $844 million, it's just actual revenues that are collected in a year versus actual expenditures.
Right.
So whatever those contributions to drive actual revenues, whatever they may be, that is helping with that is part of what's responsible for the $844 million.
Sure.
Yeah.
But so anyway, I mean, I think, as you say, it's a variety of factors that lead to it. But, I guess the question I would put is, how much confidence can we have that this will be repeated?
Okay, so that's a good point, because Kaylee brought that up earlier. It's really, while we can stop and say it's great on June 30th, what we have to be more focused on is what are we going to use that ending balance in what way for the future across multiple economic cycles, multiple fiscal years.
Yeah.
Because some of these revenue enhancement measures, as you pointed out, are not going to be there in the next year.
Like the tax increases that were temporary.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Or the suspension of some exemptions.
Yeah.
So those revenue contributors, if they were there to help to contribute to 844, if we can assume that, they will not be there in the future. So how do you count on that level of revenue producing? That's something that for the finance director, for the state, whoever that may be, to manage that across multiple economic cycles into the future and be very planful about it. That's what we're really focused on. And we're trying to convey that to legislators, that it's not, while 844 million is a lot of money and there's a lot of programs could be funded with that 844 million, we want to be more cautious and practical, that you want to fund only things which can be sustained into the future. You need to fund a program when you have money and then have to take it away when you don't manage that.
Then you get an irregularity, you know. But one other thing before we're going to go to a break in a few minutes here. But one other thing is, you know, now the council of revenues makes its prediction, and that would be, I guess, revenues coming in rather than expenses going out. But you, as a budget director, are you only concerned with going out because you're the budget director, or are you also concerned with what's coming in? Do you make a sort of parallel analysis to them on what's coming in, or are you just concerned about the budget?
No. So the first
no to everything, or not?
Yeah, that's the branding for the finance directors. No. So we have to make sure that the revenues come in on the forecast, because that's what the budget was constructed by the legislature. But when it is not, or when it is exceeding the forecast, we have to be concerned about what are the underlying inherent reasons for missing the forecast. Are they superficial, temporary, cyclical, or is there something inherent in the structure of the overall economy? And we want to make a judgment on that. And we match up allowing expenditures on the budget to ensure that whatever the rate of expenditures does not blow past what I feel is the actual rate of revenue delivery, taking into account the council's
But
forecast.
not being bound by it.
Yeah.
Well, we want to be, we're not being necessarily bound by it, but we definitely do want to make sure that the state always finishes in any given fiscal year with a positive balance for that fiscal year. The cash flows
Absolutely.
are always positive
So you've always got your eye on that ball, whether we are balancing under the Constitution.
on both
That's
sides
right.
of the equation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I like what you're saying, Kalbert, because you're pointing out that $844 million at that point in history isn't cash in the bank. It isn't the only measure of our fiscal health. That's very
right.
important. And it isn't by any means an indicator of how much we have to spend in the short term. And when we come back after this break, we're going to talk about a very big issue that we have to spend on with the money. But I like that clarification, because a lot of times politicians are concerned primarily about what they can actually spend while they're in office.
Yes.
And you're trying to put the brakes on that.
Yeah. Well, have everybody be more intellectual about what
Yes.
programs they're willing to support and fund.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, given your reference to a break, let's do a break. That's Kalbert Young. He's co-host today and host of a Hanukkah Call on Monday at 2 o'clock, and he's the president of Grassroots Institute. Our special guest is Kalbert Young, the state budget director. This is ThinkTech Talks, talking about community matters, and they do, talking about fiscal policy now and tomorrow. I'm Jay Fidell. We'll be right back after this break. Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell. This is ThinkTech Talks. We're talking about community matters, and they do, or it does. Talking about fiscal policy now and tomorrow with Kalbert Young, State Budget Director. We're honored to have him here with us today. My co-host is Kalia Akina, who is the host also of a Hanukkah Co on Monday at 2 o'clock, and the president of Grassroots Institute. So we touched on this during the break, and it's kind of interesting. You have a state balance sheet, and until 2008, the state balance sheet did not talk about unfunded liabilities, but now it does talk about some unfunded liabilities.
Well, since 2008, all states have been required to record on their balance sheet the annual unfunded liability cost, the actuarial, so the ARC, the ARC, the annual required contributions for OPEB, other post-employment benefits, OPEB, which in Hawaii is health fund liability for government retirees. What it doesn't reflect currently is the pension liability on it. And the state of Hawaii, since we're talking about the state of Hawaii's balance sheet, has been the only governmental employer in the entire state, so the counties included, the state has been the only governmental employer who has not been paying its annual required contribution towards OPEB. So each year, since 2008, the state's balance sheet has been eroding. For business owners, it's net assets, your assets less liabilities, long-term liabilities, and because one of the reasons of not meeting those long-term liabilities, the state's balance sheet has been eroding. And in any given business, after a period of time when your balance sheet goes negative, you are effectively bankrupt.
Yeah,
sure.
States can't go bankrupt.
States can't go bankrupt, but from a balance sheet perspective, that's an indication of financial health.
Right, and when you go out for financing, for bonds, for example, I remember it was about a year after you got into office, you refinanced the bonds of the state, or some of them, and that was a real coup. That saved us a ton of money. Maybe some of that money's in the 844, as a matter of fact.
Some of it over the last several years has helped to bolster a positive ending balance for each of the years for the state.
But something in the Constitution that requires you to put it on the balance sheet or not put, or for that matter, to do anything about unfunded liabilities, including pay them, because that's not a question of the balance of the budget. That's the balance sheet's a different issue entirely.
Sure.
That's correct.
Now,
correct.
Kalbert, there's a little bit of complexity here, and I know you probably sit on some boards or have sat on boards. Anyone who's sat on a nonprofit board knows that document, the balance sheet or a business, is absolutely crucial to knowing how to navigate the business. And you've mentioned that our state balance sheet does indicate, or has begun to indicate in the recent past, the current unfunded liabilities, but as you pointed out, it doesn't include the unfunded liabilities toward the pension fund, although it does for the health. But does it actually include the cumulative amount of unfunded liability on the balance sheet at the end of the year?
No, not the total liability. Even on the OPEB side, it's not the total liability. It's the annual.
And roughly, what is that amount, both on the employee retirement system and in terms of the health care system? What would be the total unfunded liability for the
You're
state
talking
of
about
Hawaii?
liquidated liabilities.
Yes.
Because there's other non-liquidated liabilities. But is that the question before the House?
Yes, and it's a figure somewhere between 20 and 35 billion dollars.
Each system, the
Right.
EUTF, which is the OPEB, and the ERS, the pension system, each of them is right around $20 billion in total liability, give or take $1 billion or
Each,
two.
so that's about 40 billion.
In total, it's about 42 billion for both in total,
Okay.
and it's about 20 billion each.
And how much of that 42 billion ends up on the balance sheet at the end of the fiscal period?
Well, none, thus currently none.
Okay.
But there are accounting rules that will be
Yes.
changing starting in fiscal year 2016.
Okay.
So that will put the entire pension liability.
So this is my question. Prior to 2016 then, we're not working with a complete set of books, so to speak. We're not dealing with the whole picture. Do you think this has created problems in terms of communicating that we're in a rosier situation than we are, or not seeing the real liabilities that we have when it comes to budgets, when it comes to legislation and funding?
Yeah, to some extent. So, as your state finance director for the last 3 years, what I've done is spent a lot of time and a lot of emphasis on educating elected officials about
Sure.
the complexity of unfunded liabilities, both in the pension side and OPEB side. And I think that has helped to get everybody a little bit more aware.
Sure. And I don't want to put you in any compromising situation, so you don't need to respond to this per se. But when I was listening to the governor's State of the State address, very clearly he spoke of what he called the surplus, the 800 million, as a positive measure of the state's fiscal health. But there was no mention whatsoever of the total for the unfunded liability. And I recall sometime in the fall or in summer of last year, you had pointed out that we'd have to pay at least $500 million a year for 30 years just to pay down the past unfunded liability. And so I just wanted your thoughts, not so much on the governor's speech, but on the problem we have when we don't have all of that information before us at the same time.
Sure. So the solution or the resolution for the state of Hawaii's unfunded liability issue is not one that can be solved overnight. I mean, it took decades to get where we are. It's going to take at least that long to resolve it. So it's not so much about can we fix it in 1 year, because we can't. But what's important is that we're now made the first step, and that's the problem. The state has not taken the very first step, which we're about to take, to start funding it. And so I do agree with the governor that the $844 million, that is one aspect of the entire financial picture, and we can look at that one aspect, and as taxpayers and residents of the state of Hawaii, we can feel good that at least in one measure there's an indication, a sign that the state is improving financially. But we have to look at these other areas, and their taxpayers and residents should feel good that the state, for the first time, will start on a course that will start addressing this problem.
What is the course we're talking?
Are you talking about Act 268?
So it's Act 268.
I don't know about
Act 268 was passed by the legislature last year, and it prescribes that starting next year, FY15, that all governmental employers must fund at least 20% of its annual required contribution for OPEB each year, and each year after 2015. They have to contribute an additional 20% until eventually in 2019 that all governmental employers will be contributing 100% of the ARC. That's landmark legislation.
Yes.
In the sense that Hawaii is the only state in the country with a mandated, prescribed funding strategy for OPEB.
You know, Kalbert, I need to say this, that Grassroots Institute is very committed to limited accountable government, and oftentimes we find ourselves in a position of being critical of fiscal measures in the state of Hawaii, and there are many to be critical of, but this is something very good. It puts us into a position of starting to move forward, and it may not be everything to everyone who wants to see us out of this problem of the cost of state union employees, but at the same time, it's a good step. But my question to you is, how protected is this fund? You understand more than anyone else our cash shortages and the temptation legislators and the administration have to use money that's sitting there. How protected would this be under Act 268?
Well, the EUTF is a trust fund, so given current Hawaii State Supreme Court rulings related to the ERS trust fund, I do believe that once the funds are in there, they'll be protected from raiding. I think the greater concern is in the future for the next 30 years, at some point in the next 30 years, when there's an economic down cycle, would the state still have the level of fortitude, or would the counties have the level of fortitude, any governmental employers still have the level of fortitude to continue to contribute?
And so the 20% may not work going forward.
Well, it's only 20% next year. And actually in the current year, the governor has already committed that we're going to start pre-funding earlier than the required Act 268.
At that rate.
At 20%. Mm-hmm. So it'll only be 20% for 1 year, but it's going to eventually by 2019, it'll be up to 100%. So, and that's a significant amount. 100% right now is about $500 million a year, $520 million.
But I'd like to ask this though. I mean, I was telling you before, I made a little list, and I may not be complete about the list. Now, some of them is liquidated. Would you know exactly what the amount is? You know, within plus interest, I suppose, and other things we have no clue. So one of them is rail. And it's not going to be covered all of it by the federal government. We're going to have to pick up some of the tab, and once they sort out the gross excise issue, and that seems to me like this issue's to be resolved there. That's going to cost $5 billion or somewhere in there. And who's to say exactly when? Then, as you mentioned, the unfunded liability to the employees' retirement system, the roads, it's a growing problem. We're not keeping up. And ultimately, it's probably going to be, at least in part, a big state obligation, even the freeways, state roads. The EPA requirement for the generators, you can say that's all a utility issue, but it's a fair chance we're going to wind up with that issue on the taxpayer's door. The sewers is another EPA requirement, in Waikiki. That's probably going to wind up on the taxpayer's door, even though it's a city issue. The energy transformation, the same thing. It's going to cost a lot of money to put all that equipment in. Smart grid is not cheap, and somehow I don't think it's going to get limited to the ratepayers. It'll be a bigger issue than that ultimately. The homeless, totally unliquidated. I mean, I don't think they can really tell us how many homeless there are, much less what it costs to repatriate 5, 10, 15, 20,000 homeless. How do you prepare for that? infrastructure. So it's 500, what is it? 500 million now? Which really seems something that got away from them for sure. And query, how are we going to do that? What's it going to be like going forward? It's very important that we maintain the university. It's probably getting older while we sit here. The same thing with DOE and the air conditioning in DOE and all the other things in DOE. I mean, the children are our most important product. We can't afford not to fund that. And query, when does it get to be a crisis? But ultimately, I think it will. Water systems. It's going to cost billions to upgrade our water systems, and that's dovetailed with climate change, because the advance of climate change issues is probably going to affect our water supply, and those two things go hand in glove, and those are billions too. And we'd like not to think about it. We'd like to kick that can down the road, but it's coming. And it's not the kind of thing where you wait till it comes and they say, oh gee, let's do something. You have to do it gradually over time, and you have to
prepare
have a plan.
for it.
Yeah. So I don't know what the tallies to. We had a program, a ThinkTech program about 2 years ago, and Peter Ho appeared from Bank of Hawaii. He started calculating all the things he could think of, and it was 40 billion anyway.
Sure.
So the question is, is this Act 268 going to address that? How are we going to identify exactly what the costs are, deal with the costs going forward? I mean, granted, this is a good thing that we're addressing it now to this degree, but going forward, I think it's going to be really important, and it's going to bite us if we don't do enough.
Well, the list that you just went through is only a partial list of
Thank
what's
you.
out there. It's only partial. And what I tell people, again, is the laundry list of financial needs for the state and the counties in the near future being the next 10 to 15 years, is very long, it's very expensive. And only one item on there is the unfunded liability issue.
That's right.
In the ETF.
In fact, that's a very significant item. If we're talking about maybe $1.2 to $1.5 billion a year under Act 268 just to pay down our unfunded liability and to pay what is current on it, we're dealing with a $6 billion operating fund in the state. That's 25%. We're saying if our operating fund for the state doesn't change that much over the next 30 years, 25% right off the top. Right. It goes to the unfunded liability. Right. And so we're going to actually, the reality, we're going to be in a much more dire, straight situation than we find ourselves now in. So what's the magic bullet? but this really is a very significant cost.
It is, but as you've mentioned already, Jay, it's like you have to pick which one of these issues you're going to fund, solve, and resolve. And frankly, every single one of them, it's difficult to prioritize which one you're going to fix first.
Well, there, in a sense, is an elephant in the room, and I don't mean Republicans. that's, or the one Republican in the
Nobody
Senate.
ever said this wasn't a corny show.
That passes for humor here, but the thing is, and that elephant in the room is what in 30 to 50 years in our cultural, social, political structure brought us to the situation of the unfunded liabilities, which is largely the very good compensation we give back to our state employees for their retirement, for their health benefits, and so forth. And that's a real cost. Questions such as, can we continue to go forward with that level of benefit have to be addressed.
I think it was the San Bernardino. The thing that brought San Bernardino down was the unfunded liabilities for pensions.
Yes,
They
or
had
Detroit
a lot
as
of
well.
retired
Detroit.
city workers out there, and gee, I mean, I know we can't, as a state, we can't go bankrupt, but if we keep on paying huge pensions, with funded or unfunded, we're going to go in the same place that counties go or cities go.
Okay, well, let's remember the context though, because this unfunded liability did not develop overnight.
True.
It's front and center now only because in 2008 there's a requirement to report it, but it always existed,
Yeah.
accounting wise.
Yes.
And frankly, $20 billion in the health fund for OPEB is a lot of the liability, no doubt. But it would have been far less if back 30 years ago, or 40 years ago even, when this system and this concept of benefits was put in place, if at that time the government started paying, if taxpayers, frankly, started paying for that future liability instead of waiting till now, 2015, when it's $20 billion. It's also going to be significantly much less if we start now
Yes.
than if you wait 5, 10, 15 years and we come back and have this show when we're still all around and the liability is $60 billion.
Well, I think it's right along the track I want to go in the next quarter, and that is, we're not just talking about this administration or the next administration. And we're not just talking about you as budget director. We're talking about what we have learned by finding ourselves against this brick wall, and how we're going to deal with the fact that administrations do ultimately come and go. And you guys could have a great idea with this act and with paying it down and trying to avoid it happening in the future, but the system changes every 4 years,
Yep.
or 8, whatever the case may be, and we could revert to the kind of philosophy we had before and wind up in the same situation again. And we take a short break. That's Kalbert Young, State Budget Director, Kali'i Akina, host of a Hanukkah Co. I'm Jay Fidell, this ThinkTech Talks, talking about community matters, fiscal policy now and tomorrow, and learning a lot. We'll be right back after this break.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell. It's ThinkTech Talks, Community Matters, and it does. We're talking about fiscal policy now and tomorrow with Kalbert Young, State Budget Director. We are honored to have him here. And Kali'i Akina, my co-host and host of a Hanukkah Co. on Monday, and the president of Grassroots Institute. And so as we left it, at least you guys have other questions maybe, but my question is, what have we learned? In terms of, coming into this kind of brick wall situation, trying to resolve it, which is a positive thing. What have we learned to go forward in the future so that we actually can resolve it and we can have a consistent plan, not now necessarily, but maybe 4, 8, 16 years from now?
Well, I hope what the state has learned is, as I mentioned earlier, we should always be thinking about funding programs, expenditures, whatever they may be, in the issue of sustainability. And that's both on the expenditure side and on the revenue side. It's not about increasing taxes. It's not necessarily about cutting programs. It's about whatever we have now, do we have the right-sized government that can sustain multiple economic cycles. And there are problems and issues, financing issues that have been created over the decades. I can't say that I'm the one that created it. I can't say I'm going to be the one that's going to solve it. But at least the first step starts with any given year in any administration. So I need for policymakers, future legislators, future finance directors to stay on the course about managing the state's programs for sustainability for the future. And it's not about one electoral term. It may not even be in the next administration. It's really, how do you fund a program today with the thought that you want to be funding it for the next 20 years? And the unfunded liability is, I'm very happy to be the finance director at the time when the state starts on the first step. But this is a step one of a 1,000-mile journey. And you need the finance director, you need legislators and future governors for the next 30 years to be of the current mindset, which is let's start paying this down, let's be transparent to taxpayers, to investors, to other states, that we are addressing this cost and we're prepared to address it. But as you mentioned, you have this long list of other competing expenditures that are going to be up there. What are we going to do about those? And we haven't even started finding a financing path for
Yeah, I
that.
mean, you could walk down the halls of the legislature right now today and count all the people that are in there lobbying for something or other, and most of that costs money, and some of it is really, what shall I say, not high priority. And so the legislature deals now, today, next week, and every year with trying to say no and maintain that sustainability. But you know, the problem is that often the legislature says yes when it should have said no.
Well, it's actually even more sneaky than that because, you know, when you have 844 million as a positive balance, I'll tell you, there's 1,000 people out there that want programs funded from year to year for only $1 million or 500,000. You got 844 million. How about spend $1 million here, $1 million there?
It's only $1 million.
It's only $1 million.
Only $1 million,
But
that's
you
right.
aggregate 100 people asking for $1 million, and suddenly, you know, you got a pretty large cost out there. You can't fund everybody. 844 million is a lot, definitely, but it is nowhere near enough. It's nowhere near enough to sustain the type of programs that everybody is asking for. You can fund some, and definitely we would want to, but you can't fund everything. And if you look with the eye of sustainability, that's the key that I think for the next generation of policymakers to think and look there and build upon the 844 million.
And we've got to get out of our mind, as you pointed out so well, that we've got this pot of money with $844 million.
Right.
If Act 268's provisions were in place, we'd take that 844 and have to subtract about 520 million.
In 2 years,
we'd start with 324 million.
Yes.
And as you point out, some of that is really representing budget modification. So it's really not an amount of money there. Now, one thing that becomes evident in our conversation here, and I'm glad for that, is that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. We're going to have to pay. But you know what I'm thinking too? Jay, you went through that long list of things that have to be done for the state. If we have the mindset that it's the state, it's the government that does those things, there's just no way that we could possibly accomplish them. And do you think, Kalbert, that there's a role for the state promoting more private sector growth and business, more investment from whether it's Asia and so forth, so that a good deal of what we traditionally look to the state to fund would happen through a growing private sector?
Yes, definitely. So it's not only the state. I like to think the state's finances are managed pretty well. Maybe not the best, but as their finance director, I like to think I do a good enough job. But I need for all the counties to manage their finances equally well, because if they don't, they will look to the state to fund.
They will.
We need all of the boards of water supply. You mentioned a lot of the land. We need all of those to be managed well. We need everything right and going well for the long term. But what is clear for government is that we cannot continue to fund the current level of government services in the current model and the past paradigm. We have to look at alternative financing structures. And I think the key there is public-private development to address a lot of these concerns. It may be called public-private partnerships. It could be incentivizing private contribution investment. But there has to be a different model, a different paradigm.
Sure.
This is largely a matter of raising capital, though, of finding the money through investment through the public-private partnerships in order to fund the project.
Well, and it may not be, it may not be state responsibility. It may be looking to offshore some of what
That's
has been a
right.
historically public state responsibility. If taxpayers think it's only a state taxpayer responsibility, then we don't have the paradigm in place that's going to pay for all of those and the ones that you didn't even list.
Very dramatic.
Yeah.
But let me take one more break. When we come back, when we come back from this, we're going to solve everything.
All right.
It's going to be amazing, okay? That's Kalbert Young, State Budget Director, and Kalbert Aquino, host of A Hanukkah Co. and President of Grassroot Institute. I'm Jay Fidell. Here we are at ThinkTech Talks, talking about community matters, fiscal policy now and tomorrow. And we're going to have one last break, come back and solve all the big problems. Be right back.
Sure.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Okay, we're back. We're live. ThinkTech Talks, talking about community matters, talking about fiscal policy now and tomorrow with Kalbert Young, State Budget Director, and my co-host, Kalbert Aquino, host of A Hanukkah Co. on Monday. This is the most exciting part of the show, really, more exciting than I had anticipated, actually, because we actually didn't come up with some actual points, to actually address these problems long term. Fabulous. So one of the things was, public-private partnerships you mentioned. Another thing I would say is building the economy, in a sustainable way. We haven't really done that. We need to do that. One of the ways that I favor is technology, but innovation in general, and there's agriculture too. There's a lot of things that we could build the economy with, and thus build the gross receipts, the gross revenues to the state. If we have, it's like practicing in a law firm. You don't care about the staples. You care about billing.
Right.
and so what we have to do is, raise the ante by raising revenues.
Sure.
If we can find a way to do that, we'll be in great shape. And the other thing, and I have to throw this in, is that maybe, just maybe, government is too big. Maybe we have too many people working in state government. Maybe we somehow find a way to shrink that, and then thus shrink down, not only the retirements, but the actual, payroll every day. Anyway, first your thoughts, and then
Absolutely.
you do.
Well, and that's definitely part of it, Jay, because I look at my role and contribution as the finance director for the state as being, if I can build the state government financial structure to be stable enough that government can get out of the way of being a burden on businesses, taxpayers, and can allow more opportunity for businesses and taxpayers to reinvest in our community through other means. And there could be a tangential benefit to the state, eventually more tax revenues. But the problem has been over the last several years in particular, and this has been exhibited under the last financial recession, that when the financial times got hard for the state in terms of revenue, it increased tax enhancement measures. We cut programs because they were unsustainable to be funded in the beginning to begin with. And that increased the level of government burden on businesses and taxpayers.
And reduces the possibility of paying off unfunded liabilities.
That's right.
Any of those.
Yeah.
So it's not anything you can fix in 3 years, but I think we've made significant progress to help government get into a better footing, that when you look forward, there's greater opportunities for people to seize, that government doesn't have to be such a burden. And it could be, in the long run, it could be items of, do we have enough revenues that we can sustain state government at whatever level without the need to raise taxes? relative to the size of government, number of employees, are the programs that the state currently offers, are they sustainable for the long term? Are they duplicative? Are we right-sized to provide the level of services that the public would want? And there may be some services the public does not need. So I agree that when you look long-term, and starting with the next fiscal year, what is the right size of government? And again, I come back to sustainability, financial sustainability across multiple economic cycles. That should be the measure mark.
So what I hear you say, at least in interlinear, is that right now we don't need a tax increase. Is that right?
The financial plan that the governor and I have worked on does not contemplate or require tax increases over the next 6 years of the financial plan. And that's how long the current financial plan is, 6 years forward looking. We have a balanced financial plan. In fact, we set as a mark to balance each year of the financial plan for the next 6 years. When I talk about sustainability, funding in the current year, so that each year for the next 6 years, that funding doesn't drive the ending balance for the financial plan in any given year to less than 5% of general fund revenues, which means that in each year the state should be managed, the finance and budget director should manage the expenditures in any given fiscal year so that the balance is always positive, at least 5% of the general fund revenue. And in that way it is balanced and without any contemplated tax increase.
So the other question that comes to mind, and then I'll turn it over to you, Khalid. I can see you. Interesting. Is, in order to perpetuate a system, okay, which recognizes this sustainability, which puts all the pieces together, not just the income statement, but the balance sheet as well as the income statement, in real planning, not just in this administration, but going forward, do we need a constitutional amendment? Do we need some sort of reorganization along fiscal lines that will protect us from the ebb and flow of administration to administration?
If that's the ultimate goal, I would say yes. Admittedly, my financial philosophy, I don't know if I could count on it being mirrored by any future finance director. Arguably, it hasn't been mirrored. I haven't been of a financial philosophy of any past finance directors. So continuing into the future, yes, I think there's a risk. How committed are we as a state to stay on the Kalbert Young financial roadmap? I don't know, because it is a conservative. I'll admit, I'm financially conservative by nature. So, and where we are currently is a very conservative path. So, if that is sustainable on that course, I don't know how you lock that in.
I don't know how you lock it in either, but any thoughts?
Well, I won't hold Kalbert's financial conservatism against him, but there are a couple of things I really appreciate. Number one, you've pointed out the importance of having all the information on the table, that we're not just looking at a cash flow, we're looking at a balance sheet that has all liabilities, and we have to deal with the fact that we're not just dealing with $800 million of quote-unquote surplus, but with $40 billion of unfunded liabilities. The second thing I like is your response that we have to deal with the question of sustainability in government. Could it be too big? And Jay's list of all the things government does, you added to that, pointing out maybe we have to look to something other than government in order to provide the goods in society. The final piece I think that's very important, I know this is on your heart, Jay, we really have to bring investment into Hawaii to fuel high levels of growth of business. And what the state can do, which would have two benefits, is adopt good practice fiscal policies toward small businesses and toward investments that are coming in. A lot of the work that's going on in China today is asking that question. How do we make it safe for foreign investment to come into Shanghai or even to Beijing and so forth? And the real problem is, can we trust the government to be supportive of business? There are so many measures that are very exciting, I think. We've recommended them through a list of 15 fiscal measures put out by Alec Laufer report. There's so many measures that we could take here in Hawaii that could make it safe for small business and attractive to big business, and we could put the onus, the engine, on the free market to provide the goods
Could you transmute
society
that into
needs.
a last question for Kalbert?
Kalbert, if you were governor, what would you make your highest priority for turning around Hawaii's economy into a sustainable, business attractive climate?
Well, thankfully, I have no aspirations at all to want to have to be in that seat. But
Then you're not a threat to anybody.
But I do agree with you. Like I said, the first and foremost, I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, the state can get on good enough financial footing to get out of the way of business development and stop being a burden on business development. And at the same time, we should be looking for what are the inherent structural, governmental structure entitlement issues for regulating businesses that have, I guess, put Hawaii at a disadvantage to other markets. And so a lot of it is, why is there not a more vibrant tech development industry in Hawaii? Some of that is rooted in very traditional entitlement requirements for businesses in general in Hawaii. So taking a look at that, what industries do we need to focus and foster and examine on what it would take to actually produce and foster those developments? And tech might be one. It's when you look around the current events that are going on, the question about development in Kaka'ako, for instance, I know it's a very hot button issue right now, but we need to ask ourselves as a state, if we're not supporting development in Kaka'ako, and I'm not saying I do, but if we're not supporting development there, we should ask, where are we supporting it then? Because the statistics don't lie. We have a shortage of housing units, not to mention affordable housing units, but just housing units. If we want to foster development in business, the first question we need to ask, where are the new employees for business development going to live? And we don't have enough housing supply. So we need to answer that question. So it's about fostering maybe right development. We need to look at what spurs development's need to entice them to develop in Hawaii. And housing, I think, is one. Pay scale is another. So government taxes, requirements for employees, we have to take a look at that. What burdens do we place on businesses that we provide for employees? Unfunded liabilities, an example, an end result example of we want businesses to provide very lucrative benefits to protect our retirees. Well, that comes at a cost, and we don't think about the front end costs as much as now we're realizing there's a huge back end cost. And so when we put these requirements on businesses, I think the government needs to think more entrepreneurial about what the burdens are. And so taking a look at that, there's a myriad of things that the state needs to do to foster business development. I think the first thing, though, is government should focus on its own house, stop being a burden financially to taxpayers, and that's about right sizing. And I think I've done my part, at least for the last 3 years, to put Hawaii at least on a course that I think we're headed in that direction.
Thank you, Kalbert. Kalbert Young, State Budget Director. Really appreciate you coming down.
Thank you for having me, Jay. Thank you, Kaylee.
You're doing a great job.
Co-host today and host of Ehana on Mondays, president of the Grassroots Institute. This is ThinkTech Talks, Community Matters, and it does. Fiscal Policy Now and Tomorrow with Kalbert Young. Thank you so much. And we hope to do it again with you, okay?
Whenever you have time, Jay.
All right. Whenever we have time, okay. Thank you, Kalbert.
Thank you.
Kalbert,
Thank you so
thank you
much.
for being here today.
Thank you.
Jay, good job.